And then things change, kind of. Something happens. A professional shows up.
Yeah, this looks good.
I know, yeah, exactly.
The babies don't look like
I know,
little
they
men
kind of,
anymore.
yes, because they interact.
Yeah.
Suddenly they interact, they're not the 1, 2, 3. A professional shows up. And this professional, born in Scotland, I think, he had some training. He obviously was not a brilliant artist, but he did go to London, perhaps, maybe in Edinburgh. London, I think he went to London and established himself as a portrait painter, not very successfully. And so had he not come to America, no one would have ever heard about him. But it just so happened that we are in the 18th century now. There was one Dean George Berkeley who had this idea that he should found a college on Bermuda, and why Bermuda, we don't know, but on Bermuda, the island of Bermuda belonged to the English, obviously, and this would be a college actually both for the scions of the American colonists and for the Native Americans. Yeah. He did. He wanted to also to teach perhaps the sons of the Native Americans, if those who wish to go.
Are there Native American artists who came out of this school?
The school never came out of the school.
Oh, spoilers. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm jumping ahead. I got excited.
So he organized a group with someone by the name of John Wainwright as the fearless leader, and also the underwriter of the enterprise, and also the government as well promised more support. And John Wainwright, he decided to stay back. He decided not to sail, not yet. So let's see what happens. But with this George Berkeley, convinced this man. He met John Smibert in London, and he said, well, our school will need a painter to teach people painting, to teach the art of painting, because it is a very important part of a young man's education. There were no schools for girls at the time. And Smibert kind of decided, you know what, my business isn't doing great, and well, why not? Interesting adventure. So he joins the group and goes with it will be known as the Bermuda Group at the time, and they all sail to America, and ultimately, and there they may have sailed to Rhode Island at first. They will end up in Boston, and there they waited for the funds, for the extra funds to come to them from England, which never realized. But the group, this so-called Bermuda Group, the Smibert began to paint in London. He began to paint it there, and with him he brought unfinished canvas. And Wainwright paid him something like £10, which was a serious amount of money at the time. £10 on account, so to speak. And so while they waited in Boston, Smibert finished this portrait and then began to paint portraits of other Bostonians who were extremely happy actually to have someone professional do it. He also brought with him a number of plaster busts of classical antiquity, of the sculptures of classical antiquity, lots of mezzotints. He also made a trip to Italy at some point, and there he copied the great masterpieces of the Italian artists. So he brought all of it with him. Suddenly in Boston, there was, well, not a museum of course, but an approximation of a studio where one could go and see the busts of those incredible antique sculptures, which did not exist in America before, because obviously Puritans did not bring them with them, and the copies in color, not just mezzotints, of the great masterpieces. So this was sort of a beginning of quasi-professional training for American artists. And mind you, we are already in the 18th century. But Baroque in Europe happened in the 17th century. So what will happen now with American painting is that a century later they will try to emulate the Baroque principles of light and shade, of the integration of the painting, of unity of composition, of exquisiteness, of excitement, because by this time the scions, the third, the fourth, whatever, the fifth generations of those Puritans, they still did not believe in ostentation. They're still Puritans, no ostentation. But then there's ostentation and there's austerity, so let's just find something in between. And sort of reasonable, the reasonable show of prosperity was at this point sort of acceptable. That was honorable. Ostentation was not honorable, but at this point, nor is austerity. So the in-between. And here we have the Bermuda Group. On the very right stands our preacher, the Dean George Berkeley, and he obviously is lost in thought before beginning to speak, or he had just finished speaking, but he's bursting with the wish to speak again. You can see it. He has a book. He has a very, very impressive tome in his left hand. He is in his right hand. His left hand is properly behind his back. Even if they didn't have pockets, it would be very impolite to have your hands in pockets. It was just not done in polite society. Next to him is his wife with a child, and a lady who accompanied the woman. Then you have the portrait of expedition. Then the two young men in their wigs who joined the expedition, and then here's our John Smibert himself, right there, standing there, looking at us, and to show the stability, the prosperity of the group. Again, the Turkey carpet is very clearly depicted here.
Which carpet?
Turkish, like a Turkish carpet. Okay. The Turkey carpet, the Turkish carpet is depicted because, again, a sign of great wealth. As you can imagine, they were absolutely, well, you know, he began to paint this painting before they left England, so these very magnificent columns, probably he emulated the columns from some English building, and then but the landscape is an American landscape, because obviously these columns were not yet built in America. But the landscape is, as I said, an American landscape. But everybody in one way or another is interacting. Even Dean Berkeley, with his pregnant pose of speech, sort of thinks to address the entire company, right there. The painter is looking at us, and he's co-holding the canvas, actually, or map of America, in his hand, right here. The ladies too, the lady one looking at us, the other one clearly is talking to her. Then he painted John Wainwright into the painting, right here, looking very successful and very wealthy. He never came to America, but he is listening to every word that Dean Berkeley is about to have issued or is about to issue, and writing it all down eagerly, as you see. So everybody's doing something, and there's this in gestures, in poses, in positions, in interaction, hands, eyes. There is this constant interweaving of action and of players. Here it is. Began at London, composed after group arrived in Newport to await the funding. The funding never came, so we know that. And now we have one of our first American painters, of whom we know, and his name is Robert Thicke, Boston. And in Boston there's a very wealthy family of Isaac Royal with 2 L's. And he made a lot of money exporting molasses, rum from Bermuda. And the family is very, very prosperous. This is his 22-year-old son. And you'll actually see Isaac also in one of the paintings later. And he is enamored with this Bermuda group, and he wants that group something like this painted for himself. The only thing is that Smithard by now is incapacitated. I mean, either he has rheumatism, one of those things, so he cannot really paint himself. And so the young Isaac Royal goes for the next best thing, who is an American and who spent time in Smithard's study and looked at everything. So he's copying the same painting, essentially. But what a difference. We're back to 1, 2, 3, 4. But you see that even he is trying to copy the hands, the movements. Instead of Dean Berkeley, we now have the young heir wearing, again, the best that could possibly be found. Still, all these things are still exported. The lace, the golden trim, the velvet kaftan, all of that is very much important. The ladies, in the Bermuda group, you see, Smithard goes so far as to drop the ladies' décolletage very low. Now that's rather risque. These are Puritan families. What happened to the button-up lace? No. Now they are in the 18th century, and they do know what's happening in Europe. They do know of the Rococo Moors, which are not puritanical, anything but puritanical, and they even spilling into England, into Anglican England. So as you see, the lady's décolletage is dropped significantly. In fact, the companion, even if the mother still somewhat covers her bosom, the companion, you essentially, they're almost spilling out. And well, clearly the royal family wanted the same thing, because the dresses are very similar to the dresses in the royal portrait, and the décolletage is very, very low, even on a little girl. But the Turkish carpet too is considerably less intricate than the one in the first group. But most importantly, as I said, we're back to the 1, 2, 3. We're back to likenesses that are conveyed through sort of flat application of paint. But they're getting there. They'll get there. Here's the father, Isaac and Isabel Royal, but this already is done by a great painter, by a great American painter by the name of John Singleton Copley, of whom we'll talk in the next lecture. So that's why these are two separate portraits, and this is why it jumps so much. So Isaac Royal bequeathed some of his enormous wealth. Obviously he left plenty for his own family, but then he bequeathed some for Harvard, and he wished to establish a school of law in Harvard. That, however, the chair, it's called the Royal Chair, will be empty until 1815, as you see, when one Isaac Parker undertook to teach law part-time. And then that same John Smithard that did the Bermuda group, as you see, was very, very much in vogue, because he was the only professional painter in Boston, and Richard Bell, another very wealthy merchant, is hiring him to do his portrait. He's wearing a full wig, very differently he stands from, remember our self-portrait here. I should have put those two together just to compare. From Thomas Smith, which is he's still self-taught, as you see here, but the idea is the same. The composition is the same. The man that of the sea has a little window cut in his study so that the sea could be seen, whether the sea itself or a portrait or a painting. Here it is. He was a merchant. He was not a mariner himself. He may have been when he was a young man, but there he is. He's now in full wig, and he is wearing He's wearing almost an ostentatious coat of velvet, and you can see it's velvet. Prosperous merchant depicted him dressed in fashionable costume and standing next to the writing table, and a beautiful, beautiful chair, a throne chair with a velvet cushion right there, and he clearly holds some sort of bill of sales. a letter of exchange, any one of those, and this is one of his ships, a tall ship that's sailing off and shows to the full the prosperity of the men. Back to Robert Fieke, and back to the Mezzotins. Now there are all these Boston beauties, not just the men, the ladies, who who want themselves.
They're just the way you said. Now there are lots of Boston beauties, and they're not just men.
Oh, right, exactly. That's very true. Who very much want themselves painted because they know what's going on in England. In England, the Sir Godfrey Kneller, born in Germany and then finally found himself in England, became the foremost portrait painter after the Restoration for Charles II, and then George I, I think, after William and Mary, all of those, and he just had a formula of how to depict a beautiful woman, and he also had this this knack of even when the woman was not particularly spectacular, he had this knack of giving her so much dignity and so much nobility of spirit that even if the face weren't particularly good looking, she looked stunning. And of course she was always dressed in most beautiful clothes. And the Boston Society wanted the same thing. They're not Puritans anymore. They want to look like that as well. And that's what Fieke kind of manages to do there, as you see here. Look at these and look at these. These are more stiff. They're considerably more stiff. But he manages to give them the poise. He gives them the beautiful clothes. Their faces are somewhat wooden compared to these. These are very charming, lovely, engaged faces. These are somewhat simpler. Also, the women in England at this point are receiving, especially women from this sort of families, receiving considerable education, which the American women are still not receiving, which of course reflects on one visage. But everything else, except for the faces, the breast is done the exact same way on all of them. Look, this dropping décolleté, and the beautiful shawl, or spectacular curtain behind, or she's sitting in front of a very dramatic background. One has a book in her hand. Isn't this lovely? So she wants to show that she is learned.
And it's open too.
And it's open. And it's open as well. Exactly, because Berkeley's book was closed.
Oh. Well, he was too busy speaking. He couldn't read
that's
at that
true.
time.
This one has flowers, and this one just holds her beautiful shawl. So Robert Fieke finds himself very much employed, and enjoys it obviously, as do his sitters. This is John Hesselius. She was a very distinguished, member of Annapolis Society. John Hesselius, he is the son of the Hesselius who did the portrait of the two Native Americans who were cheated out of their land. Yeah. So this is his son. So you see, as with so many crafts, a profession goes from father to son. And in this case, his son finds himself in the South now, in Maryland, in Annapolis. It says so. I didn't have to think about it. The son of the Swedish-born portraitist Gustavus Hesselius. The lady, Mrs. Richard Brown, was a wife of a church warden of St. Anne's Church. You know St. Anne's Church in Annapolis?
I don't.
It must be one of the central churches. It's just that you're not a churchgoer.
I am not.
Yeah. The same kind of formula. She's a wife of a church warden, so no décolletage, nothing spilling over. Even though it's still dropped, but
I don't know, that lace, all it needs to do is flop
she can
forward.
either pull it up
I'm just saying, it flops forward.
that could do, but then of course you can't see this beautiful, very expensive brooch. Because look, that pearl is worth a lot. That church warden clearly was no Puritan, because what she's wearing, just that brooch alone, and I can't see the earrings, but that brooch alone is worth one's weight in gold. Yeah. Beautiful fabric. He's learning. This is not Fique, this is the other one, his cellulose. So, American art is coming into its own, as you see, even though it's done by foreigners, yet. And there's the husband. Well, look, at least the husband is somber and reticent. He spills all his love and his fortune onto the wife.
That's
which
kind
we
of
like.
nice.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't mind him either. He's kind of soft.
No, they look.
He doesn't look mean. He doesn't look like those other
I
guys.
think they look like cousins.
Okay.
And- No, they could be because families married. They could be third cousins or.
Well, I like them.
Look at their mouths. The
It
mouths
also
look
could,
identical.
it could also be the fact that they're being painted by the same person.
That's possible too.
It-
Okay. That too is possible. Forward.
Forward.
We are in the South now. And unlike the northern colonies, whether the Plymouth or Massachusetts, these southern colonies did not start off well. The Jamestown colony, first settlement in North America, which was in 1607, you see, and it gave England the first foothold in that European competition for colonizing America. It was a private venture that was financed by a Virginia company back in England. And then James I granted, who was the son of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scotland. And he granted, and he became James I of England, and he was James VI of Scotland, and thus he united the two lands. So he granted it to this group of investors, a charter, to be able to go and colonize the land. But Virginia was the English name for the entire, at this point, and Virginia comes from the Virgin Queen Elizabeth, and essentially he gave them this charter, and he felt, well, all those lands from Florida to New York, it was all called Virginia at the time. North America, north of Florida. The charter gave the company the right to settle anywhere from roughly present-day North Carolina to New York State, not Florida, North Carolina. And the company's plan was to reward investors by locating gold and silver deposits and by finding a river route to the Pacific Ocean for the trade. These people were dreamers, were utopians. The Puritans who came to the north, they were realists. They may have thought of themselves as the lost tribe of Israel, and Winthrop may have thought of himself as Moses, which he did, but they were hardworking realists. These, on the other hand, were delusional. They were completely convinced that where they're going, the fields are lined in gold. Again, jewelry grows from the trees, and so as a result, people who came did not really want to work, did not know how to work. They were, and then later on, the Cavaliers will come. After the English Revolution, the English Civil Wars that began in 1642 and lasted for 20 years, and that was the strife between the Royalists, who were called the Cavaliers, and the Roundheads, who were the followers of the Protestants. And the Protestants were victorious, and so these Cavaliers, the younger sons, they had absolutely no prospects. And Cavalier comes from cavalier, cheval, horsemen, knights. But they expected that things would just be given to them. And when they ultimately came, and they were hoping for this instantaneous wealth that, of course, did not appear, they began stealing from the Native Americans. And as a result, of course, there was a conflict there. It will take a long, long time for these colonies finally to find their footing. But this is a replica of what the original Jamestown fort may have looked like. The story of Pocahontas also comes from the Virginian colonists. Happened considerably later, and it's true that a Native American lady by the name of Pocahontas did marry not John Smith. She married John Rolfe, and who was a prosperous merchant, and he took her to England, and she was introduced. And then they decided to go back to America, and but she became ill in England and died before they sailed back.
Wasn't she like?
She had a son.
Wasn't she a child? I mean,
She was very young. Do I have it
she,
here? She was 17. I think she was not 13, not 15.
She was-
She was 17.
she
and
was. She did meet a John Smith, whom she did save.
There was a John Smith who wrote a lot about the colonies, the southern colonies, and he wrote a lot about Pocahontas. I haven't read it, so I don't know.
Right. Okay.
But her name and the John Smith name are connected.
Right.
But he wasn't married to her. I don't know. I know he wrote a lot about this episode. They had a son. I mean, she was 17, I think, when they were married. 23 when she died. But I think he went back to America and continued his activities as a merchant. There was a man of purpose who came from England that ultimately, I think his name may also have been Berkeley or something similar to that. I don't remember. But he took these lands and these failing enterprises into his hands and whipped them into shape. And they began to prosper, particularly by sale of tobacco. The sale of tobacco was, of course, and then molasses also was what made them so wealthy. But instead of uniting into towns as the Northerners did unite, they had their plantations, and the plantations were they disunited. They almost became like ancient Roman latifundia, which then became medieval estates of sorts. That to a great extent they were self-sufficient. Whatever they needed was produced on the estate. They had their carpentry shops and metallurgy, and then soon enough even perhaps glass blowing. Even though originally whatever was exotic, whatever was unproducible in America was again exported from England. And the population, you see, was ruled by just a number of families that mattered in Virginia. And those families very much considered themselves the representatives of the English nobility, and they felt they must behave as such. And they certainly had given themselves great airs, and were very, very different from, of course, the very hard-working Northerners. And work on plantations was very hard. Soon enough, they began to exploit and to import slave labor. This time, black slave labor from Africa on these plantations. And then they wanted to represent themselves, of course, as noblemen. So here's one. There was a German artist who actually traveled up and down, north to south, and Justus Kuhn, and he specialized in these portraits. Very often, what he did, in fact, when there was a period, perhaps of unemployment, he would prepare the canvases already with the dresses and with the background, because these backgrounds that you see here have absolutely nothing to do with Virginia at the time. Virginia at the time did not have these spectacular palaces with beautiful columns and gorgeous incrustations, whether in wood or marble or what have you. And then, of course, in the back, what you're looking at is almost Versailles. You're looking at a very formal French garden. No such thing existed in Virginia. But, well, they wished to present themselves as such, and it gave them a satisfaction of thinking that they were such. And as long as they paid money and were happy, all was well. Here stands a boy in this beautiful silk damask coat, and in his hand is a bow and arrow. Now, needless to say, one does not go hunting in a gorgeous silk damask coat, even if you are a 7-year-old boy. But there he is, and a partridge is given to him by his servant boy, who has a silver neck, what is it?
Collar?
Collar. It's a silver collar, exactly.
Oh.
Yep, to show his dependence. So all of this was required, of course, by the people who who solicited these paintings, who wanted the paintings. But again, he may have been a German painter. He certainly did not have much training in painting, because here we are presented with a certain degree of stiffness, and as I said, he may have been preparing these canvases beforehand, and then just sort of painting the face into it, because everybody wanted the same portraits. These former cavaliers and their later families did not have really much artistic imagination. Here's another one, another portrait in Richmond in the south by Nehemiah Partridge, and this is a perfect example how they use the mezzotint. This is a mezzotint of a painting. You see mezzotint print, a painting done by one John Smith after William Wissing of a noble boy back in England. And here he shows, it's a very Baroque painting. He is in the center, his leg is out, his beautiful cape flowing away from him. He is sitting in the Bowery, and the lights and darks, the lights and the shadows are very much present by molding and shaping the face. It's all very elegant, it's all very, very theatrical. There's a little boy and there's a parrot. And here is a copy of that mezzotint. The parrot is there, the dog is there. I don't have the full length, I don't know if it is a full length, but the leg is here. He's trying to ape the cape, but because he has not really studied the academic presentation of the light and shadow, it becomes interestingly again. It sort of becomes like that New York couple, because the reflection of light is so in your face and so stark. It almost serves as a painting's composition, and almost reminds us of the 20th century art, where painters intentionally stepped back from academic art. So right here, but this is a perfect example. This is from the Baroque mezzotint to the American painting. And now a bit about architecture. I mean, we did a little bit about architecture in the north, now a bit of it in the south. The first significant building in the south was that of the College of William and Mary, which of course is still one of the best universities in the land. And this is called the Christopher Wren building. Christopher Wren was an architect in England who built an enormous amount of churches and buildings in England, most importantly St. Paul's Cathedral, after the Great Fire of 1666. After that fire, when London was burnt down, Christopher Wren became the prime architect. And construction of the building began, as you see, in 1695. 2 years after the school was chartered. The South did not pay as much attention, did not value education nearly as much as, in fact, the northern colonies did. In fact, their attitude was, well, our sons will need to educate, but the plantation workers and everybody below us needn't to have any education. It only gives them wrong ideas. So as a result, the first college in the South will not happen until about 60 years after Harvard was founded. But it did happen. The oldest college in the nation after Harvard. And then we have here Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, John Tyler, John Marshall, all studied in these rooms, and George Washington was once chancellor of the college. Well, today, of course, as I said, it's one of the best universities in the land. It's called the Wren Building because there was this delusion at some point that Christopher Wren actually designed the building, but he didn't. The design that was emulated by the architects of William and Mary was that of Christopher Wren. It was completed in 92, and it is the north front of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea for retired soldiers. And what you see the similarities. It is a brick building, and in fact here we still have sash windows, but these windows actually have rectangular panes with fairly large pieces of glass, which were imported from England. I mean, this was a great luxury. The dormers were added to William and Mary, and the roof, the hipped roof, is more steeper than the roof in Royal Hospital. But now the architects decided to do rectangular windows everywhere, as opposed to these arched windows. But in the middle, what's very important is in the middle they introduced this sort of front temple-like structure with a steeple above it. With Christopher Wren, the structure is much more classical because he himself followed Andrea Palladio, who was a Renaissance architect. But the idea of the projecting temple front seems to be taken from here. It appears that the doors are a little too wide and the door upstairs is a little too narrow, but nevertheless there's certainly unity of design, and the design is very horizontal, and it worked quite well. Here's another view. Here, for instance, these windows obviously were taken from here, from this wing, and in fact, if you actually probably shown this painting right away, because this and this are very similar, and the dormers up above. But at the same time, this projecting facade doesn't have the steeple, and the steeple was taken from here. So it's a combination. It's a combination of the design. And soon thereafter, because they didn't really have a governor's palace in Virginia, and then Williamsburg will become the capital soon after. Not Jamestown was first, but then Williamsburg.
Was it called a palace?
It's called Governor's Palace.
I see. Okay.
That's what it's called. But they really didn't have a meeting place, because, as I said, there were just these plantations that were spread around. They would meet in one place or another and discuss the necessary measures, whatever they needed to discuss. But otherwise they didn't have one. So here they built one. This is a reconstruction because the building was burnt in 1781. But because of the actually Thomas Jefferson's drawing and some extant engravings of the front, they were able to reconstruct it.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, kind of looks like a French chateau.
Such a funky building.
Yeah. I mean, it also clearly sort of, it's the same idea with the red brick and the dormers.
But usually when you
But
have
then they raised.
when you have a roof like that, usually the building itself is taller. I mean, here the roof is
Right.
the half the building.
I know. And then they also introduced that same steeple, and they introduced the balustrade you see on top. It's a nice building. It's the most important thing about the building actually is this balcony. It's sort of a papal balcony. You know, when the Pope wants to make announcements, he goes out on his balcony in front of the entire St. Peter's Square. And here in this building, they also introduced the balcony where a governor or officials could go out and announce the changes. It served as the official residence of 7 British governors over several decades, and during the Revolutionary War was the executive mansion of the first 2 governors of the Virginia Commonwealth, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. And indeed it was during Thomas Jefferson's stay there that he must have done a drawing. He was, after all, a man of enlightenment. The palace was rebuilt in 1930 on the foundations of the original building, and the restoration is very accurate. Here more, and now the plantation houses, we might as well look at them. One of the wealthiest men in Virginia in the 18th century was Robert King Carter. He became an acting governor of Virginia, and he acquired the moniker King from his wealth. These plantations existed on tobacco, as I said, and most of these of the houses, or the plantation houses, they sit on rivers, and the loads of tobacco leaf were were loaded onto the ships right there on the river, not far from the house, and shipped to Europe and shipped to England. The house is called Shirley, unquestionably after one of the female members of the family, built on James River, where his tobacco crop could be loaded directly into freighters bound for England. It's the oldest active plantation in Virginia and the oldest family-owned business in North America. It is built as a perfect cube, again with this very sort of French bulbous roof with very, very large dormers and a projecting porch. Now this porch harkens back to designs by Christopher Wren, who loved classical architecture, and this happens to be in Tuscan order, right there. The double porch, and this double porch functioned in a number of, in plenty of American films of the Old South. And here it is. This is actually a very, very charming little building, also built by Robert Carter. And this is a Christ Church, which is done in as a perfect short-armed cross right here, and it's also done in brick in Flemish bond. I'll show you, which allows for the somewhat differing colors of the brick to show, and gives the surface a lovely, intricate kind of flickering appearance. Give relief to the surface. That's fine. It was constructed on top of the earlier church, and commissioned by his father originally, and in the chancel, Carter's both parents were buried. It is, as I said, these are the roof again is very prominent. The semicircular, elongated windows with a keystone up above each of them. Then there are elliptical windows above each entrance. One entrance has a triangular pediment, and the other one has a circular pediment. And as a result, correspondingly, the door here, the top of the door is a half circle, and here is rectangular. And then these windows above the door, they also have 4 keystones, and it's up, down, and on each side. It's just a very elegant, very cohesive, very simple building that strikes you with its symmetry and balance, almost Renaissance in a way. Symmetry, balance, cohesiveness, all of it is there. And what's also we saw in the north also they built the old ship's meeting house, but with these very characteristic pews. Here they're even taller. These are very tall pews, and those were done certainly for privacy, so that the Carter family could come there and pray in their privacy, so no one could be looking there. And it's still very much the case. So you see these pews. Oh, here's the Flemish bond. You see that there are all sorts of different bonds, but it's actually it's a misnomer. It's not really Flemish, but it's not native to Flanders or even nearby, but it does appear in late medieval buildings, and it's scattered all over Northern Europe. In fact, Eastern Europe loved it, Poland loved it, and in contrast to English bond, garden wall bond, or other functional bonds, you can look them up if you're really interested. Flemish bond is a decorative bond that lends visual quality to a wall surface. As you see, they have alternating stretches on the sides of the brick. The bricks are laid either horizontally or perpendicularly, or so that different sides of the brick would be shown on the outside. And so they're called stretchers, sides of the brick, and headers, ends of the brick. And they form very pleasingly patterned regularity. They do require great skill, so clearly skill was there. Drayton Hall in Charleston, South Carolina, we're looking at the plantation houses. Now, you see it has sort of a similar porch as has the Shirley House. the double-storied porch, except this porch is not only projecting, it's also receding. And this porch is the real thing. It was not redone, reconstructed, did not burn. It's what was placed there in the first place. And it's the nation's earliest example of fully executed Palladian architecture. As Andrea Palladio, as I said, was a 16th century architect who worked in Venice and the Venetian region, and then was adopted by Christopher Wren first, and then the following architects, and became all the rage, really. And books were written on 18th century Palladian architecture. And those were the books that Americans, in fact, used in order to build their own houses. Let's see. Okay, we'll talk about the books soon enough. The house has a double projecting, because it projects and it recesses, portico on the west side, and it faces away from the river and towards the beautiful, beautiful land. Perhaps they didn't want to see all these freight vessels being loaded, uploaded, unloaded. The double projecting portico resembles a similar feature at Villa Carnaro, well, kind of. Country estate near Venice, Italy, designed by Andrea Palladio. Now here's the Venice estate. It is significantly different, and it is considerably more coherent and far more Renaissance than, of course, our plantation house. But as far as the porch is concerned, yes, it projects and recesses. And as far as I can see, that's pretty much the only similarity. What do you think? Here's the Palladio.
It's pretty different.
Yeah, but they did pick. But then, of course, that was first an ancient Roman architectural design, and then Renaissance inherited it. That they would do the first story they would do in the Doric order, the second story would be in the Ionic order.
Oh yeah, but that's from the Colosseum.
Right, even before that, from the Theatre of Marcellus.
Yeah.
But you see what Palladio does here, there are only two stories, so he dismisses the Tuscan or the Doric order, he does the Ionic and then Corinthian, but here in the plantation, they do the Tuscan order first and then the Ionic order on top. My personal opinion, it's a poor replica, but quickly, maybe a number of you already know, but just so you know these orders. The ancient Greeks had three basic architectural orders, and they were the Doric order, which consisted of a very plain capital. That's what distinguishes it, a very plain capital. And then the frieze was these triglyphs and metops, and the column sat directly on the ground. Then there was a Ionic order, so instead of just a plain capital, it had these ram's horns, as you see, the volutes they call it. And then the column sits on a base. And then the third order, which the Romans loved and the Greeks didn't, was called the Corinthian order. And again, the capital is no longer a plain pillow, it is no longer a volute, ram's horns. It is this beautiful acanthus plant that grows all over the Mediterranean, that grows around sort of a basket. And that's what the Corinthian order is. It's essentially Ionic, but the capital is different, even though in some of the Corinthian capitals there are still the remains of the Ionic order, as you can see here. And no more these metops, triglyphs, it's a continuous frieze, right here. This is your Doric order, plain, very plain capital, Ionic, with the ram's horns and a base, and here in the tops and triglyphs. This is a continuous frieze, as you see, and this is the Corinthian order, and these are these beautiful, beautiful leaves that took great skill to carve. All right, and these are the books that the Americans used. There were many, but one of the most frequently used books is the one by William Salmon, Palladio of London. And it was published in the 18th century, and there were books on the 18th century Palladio architecture, London architecture, which was introduced by Wren and then the Americans will just bypass Wren and go straight back to Palladio. Palladio Londonense is the London art of building. That's what it says here, the London art of building. And here's a building that that allegedly, in fact, used one of these books. It is in Richmond, was built for the Taylor family, and it's constructed by the colonel himself. That plantation was in fact meant primarily for horse breeding, and it developed the finest racetrack horses of the 18th century. They were bred on this plantation. And here's another book you see by James Gibbs, a book of architecture containing designs of buildings and ornaments. And these are the books that were used by the American architects. The family, the Taylor family, along with the Cotters, were very, very wealthy, and of course they all intermarried. There were several families there in Virginia. They knew everybody and they knew each other, and to be in, you had to be part of one of those families. They owned a number of plantations, ironworks, and mines. So James Gibbs, another influential English architect, he was born in Scotland, and he is the one who left a very important legacy of design, his book. So the folio contains this one, just a lot of drawings, designs, perspectives, blueprints, you name it. And it features the commissions, such commissions as London St. Martin in the Fields, that inspired all the steeples in America. Because St. Martin in the Fields has this incredible steeple, and that's what all the other steeples followed, that design. Well, still, actually I should have included this when we were talking about Quakers, and when we were talking about the Pennsylvania Dutch. Yeah, well, let's go up a bit, so let's go back up to Pennsylvania, and we talked about all these forms of art, which of course, for which the Americans looked back to England, to the native country, and brought in either painters or architects or emulated them. Now the one really original form of American art, and began quite early, is a quilt. A quilt really is an American thing. And really all it needs is just two sheets of fabric and then the little thing in between to put together. And these were parsimonious people, and of course they saved all pieces of fabric, and they never threw anything out. And near every sewing table there would always be a basket with refuse that could be put to use in quilts, and put to use it was. However, the Amish developed their own quilts, and very specific quilts. Just any piece of fabric wasn't enough. They were a very strict community. They're still a very strict community, and certain colors were designated as appropriate. And they also developed this very specific design of a square in the middle.
Has anyone told them that the coronavirus is out and about?
Ha ha ha.
Just saying.
Ha ha ha. They're probably the safest.
They probably are the safest.
Yeah. So the Amish reject all worldly elements in their designs, even if the fabric was pretty. They didn't want that. They just wanted very specific colors, solid colors, and the community actually sanctioned the colors and styles. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, those are the most sought after, those old quilts, and of course they're worth a great deal today. The classic Amish quilts feature definite patterns which contrast with a plain background, and as I said, a square is very much is very prominent in those quilts. So this is very much a typical American design. And another very native, very typical American design is the Shakers, the Shaker community, and United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, more commonly known as the Shakers because of the dance that they did, kind of a shaking dance, and it is a millenarian, restorationist Christian sect founded in 18th century England. In other words, they very much believed in imminent coming, second coming. That's what the sect was about. They were initially known as shaking Quakers because of this ecstatic dance that I was telling you about. They were led by women, interestingly enough. Women determined what they did, how they did it, and when they did it. And some of them are known. They settled in colonial America, originally in the New Lebanon, New York, called Mount Lebanon. And they also practiced a celibate communal life, where everything was owned communally. And so long as they could continue to convert others, then their numbers grew. Because, as I said, they practiced celibacy. But the moment that they stopped, of course, they shrunk pretty much to nothingness. They developed a very unique, very delightful, very formal, interestingly enough, plain type of furniture that today, the original Shaker furniture, again, is extremely, extremely valuable. They certainly would be would be very surprised if they saw the prices for their furniture that their furniture commands today. In a way, the architect and designer Frank Lloyd Wright, when he designed his furniture, he very much took his inspiration from Shaker furniture. It's all very plain, all very functional, sturdy, but also they have this inner sense of elegance that pervades everything they did. Didn't last long, again, with the accumulation of wealth. Of course, Shakers were out, and Chippendale was in. The Thomas Chippendale lived in the 18th century. In the middle of the century, he published his book of styles that became all the rage, and there was nothing plain any longer about the furniture. On the contrary, the furniture was twisted, the furniture was curved, the furniture was carved and adorned and decorated. And of course, that's where the American cabinet makers absolutely excelled. They were by this time as good as the English, and better in the sense that they have so much more wood. They could throw away pieces that didn't work out, that the English really could not. They also, these cabriolet legs, for instance, right here, they could take a much thicker piece of wood and carve it in a much greater curve than the English could. So all of this Americans did very, very brilliantly, and Chippendale became all the rage, which is this very elaborate, very lovely furniture. A lot of it is done in mahogany, which is a beautiful sort of a reddish wood. But then, here it says figured mahogany. Thomas Chippendale. But then all sorts of woods were used. Same with chairs. There's the Chippendale chair that sits very very sure of itself on its two cabriolet legs, and here we know in fact the men who did these chairs. Oh, hey, how have you done?